Are you able to swiftly and firmly recall your favorite event that would occur each and every year when you were an adolescent? By this, I don't mean your favorite day or holiday, although it could take place on a holiday, as mine does, but more so your favorite thing that happened every year. The thing that brought you the most joy, or perhaps just the thing that occurred during this event is something you remember so fondly that it seems in some way like a treasure unto itself. The type of thing that evokes such brilliant memories that even today, part of you would be like, man, I wish I could go back to the way that I felt when this thing happened each and every year. Could be something like you headed to your family's cottage, something that is fairly popular up here in Canada, or it could even be, a specific game that you play every Christmas when your family on both sides get together and you have a wonderful game that you all play. Could even be something like being visited by a friend that moved away, or when you moved away, and each year your parents and their parents organize for you both to spend some time together because that friendship was so wonderful. I know you have one of these. Each person has one of these. It might take some time for you to recall, but it exists. For me, it is a very easy event that occurred every year. I would look forward to it all year round, and it would happen on a specific holiday, one which I'm sure is a lot of people's favorite day. This would be Halloween. And the event itself, in short, was a treasure hunt. You see, for most of my adolescence, I lived out in a rural part of Canada. We didn't have a lot of neighbors, or at least close neighbors. It wasn't like we lived in a suburb or anything like that. So trick-or-treating just wasn't something that we did. And so my father realized, because he had a very odd child, which was me, he realized that he needed to try and make Halloween special for me and perhaps maybe some family friends. My father did something very special. What he did is that he and a couple of his close friends would plan for absolute months a very elaborate treasure hunt, one that would take place entirely, for the most part, outside over our property and some of the other neighbors in the area's property, including clues that were things like treasure maps and riddles, and the paper that we would get that would tell us where we needed to go next for the treasure hunt. They would look really old, or kind of burnt or singed, and things of this variety. And us as the children would start with the first clue, which would always be very alluring. It would always start with some kind of a great mystery, but with the promise that once this mystery has been solved, once this treasure hunt had been completed, that we would indeed find something very important. So myself and the other kids that were involved, and initially it was only about 6 other children, but as we did this for a period of over 6 years, I believe, by the end there was as many as 20 children. These Halloween treasure hunts became, for our family and the other people that took part, both children and adults alike, to be incredibly special. Some of you might be wondering, well, what kind of things were you searching, or what kind of story was this treasure hunt ensconced in? And a lot of times it would be things like pirates, or Vikings or medieval knights. In one case, there was aliens. One of my favorites, in fact, definitely my favorite, was a local legend of a gold prospector who him and his colleagues had found some gold, but then he went crazy and he killed the rest of his colleagues and took what gold he found and buried it so that he could come back to it at a later time. But because he was crazy, he was killed in a bar fight, but his gold remained buried. Just wonderful stuff that the kids, we would eat it up. But as much as we would eat it up, the stories themselves wasn't the point, nor was the treasure the thing that we would find, which for the most part would be things like candy, because it's Halloween, of course, but also things like costumes and coloring books for some of the younger kids. But my favorite thing that would always be in there is that I know my father would go out and he would buy books at a bookstore about the things that I love: UFOs, vampires, werewolves, ghosts. Those books would be in this eventual treasure that we would find, which would be it was a box. It kind of looked like basically looked like a coffin, and it would be, and sometimes it would be placed inside a structure, or at one time it was buried. But I digress. The thing that we would find wasn't the point either. The thing that made it special for me and for the other kids was the journey, the places that we would go, and how we felt along the way. The clues, the things that we as a group of kids would have to think about to try and recall, oh, this clue mentioned this abandoned trailer. Oh yes, there's this abandoned trailer on the Chisholm's property. We have to go there. Oh right. And then we'd head there, and then there'd be another clue, and then we'd get it, and as kids we'd be like, what is this? What are we looking for? And then we'd have to solve that. There would always be these, they'd be somewhat harmless, but we'd make a big deal of them because we're kids. These traps, my father and his friends that helped him with these treasure hunts would set these fun traps, like things falling from trees or styrofoam coming down like rocks and stuff like that. The story was fun. The story was there to initially entice us. The treasure was fun too, because that's part of the story. The story would be like, there's this treasure. You got to go find it. There's going to be some cool stuff for you kids, right? But it was the quest that was always the most important part. And it was the quest, the search, the time we spent figuring out how to find this treasure, this aspect of the occasion that created, for me, such a treasured memory. It was the thing which, straight to this day, to this very moment, perhaps the most important thing to me, certainly the most important day of the year when I was younger. And part of this still lives within me, very obviously. And part of this, that feeling that has been beyond formative in how I've always done magic. This love of the spirit of adventure. And add a little dash of course, Indiana Jones, Fortune and Glory Kid. These two things just have never, ever gone away. That at one point in my earlier researches involving the Western ritual magic tradition, at some point I came across something that really fascinated me. It was something which, for a period of time, was an important aspect of magic, seemed to have its moment within the magical continuum here in the West, but it is rarely, if ever, brought up these days, but it is something, an aspect of the magical world which our ancestors lived in, which we cannot ignore, and which I think is deserving of your attention. We all know that treasure is real. Buried treasure was certainly very definitely real. That those who went looking for it, the people that would hunt this treasure, were real also. But to go along with both of these things, that sometimes ritual magic would be used to aid in the finding of treasure. My name is Douglas Batchelor, and you are listening to What Magic Is This Podcast, a podcast about magic, the occult, the esoteric, the paranormal, the supernatural, and the weird. And I would love for you to join me on this adventure of examining a somewhat forgotten and lost art. The art of magical treasure hunting. The allure of treasure, buried treasure, buried riches, is alive and well to this very day. I'm not talking specifically right now, metaphorically or figuratively. I'm talking about real buried treasure from the past that people can search for here and now. I'll give you an example. You see, I live on an island, about as far west as you can go in Canada. There's not a ton of people here, which is one of the main reasons that I moved from Canada's largest city to here. It's because it is somewhat isolated from the rest of Canada, the rest of the world in a way, right? And that allure of the isolation of this place was something that a lot of people connect with. And indeed, this connected even with some weirder people. By that, I'll get to it in a sec here. But when I first moved to this island, making acquaintances with other people, just making small talk even, this could be from somebody giving me a massage to people that I meet on a chairlift on the one and only local ski hill here on this island. It's always, what do you do? What do you do for a job? And I would tell them I'm a podcaster. And a lot of people that would just, let it go. Or other people would ask, oh, what's your podcast about? And I would mention that my podcast would be about a history of things like magic, witchcraft, and the occult. Some people would just stop talking about it. They'd cease asking me anymore. But some of the locals, some of the people, who have lived on this island for a long time would say, oh, that's interesting. You're interested in this kind of stuff, and you got a show about this kind of stuff. Do you know about the buried treasure of Brother 12? I promise I'll make this quick, but Brother 12 was a early 20th century English mystic and writer by the name of Edward Arthur Wilson. He founded for all intents and purposes, he called it a spiritual group. There was a lot of Egyptian stuff involved there, but it was basically a cult. And it was located just a little bit south from where I currently live on this island. This mystic, Edward Wilson, he changed his name to Brother 12. Of course, he was the head of this cult, and he had quite a few members, quite a few followers, but the most importantly, that a lot of his followers were actually quite wealthy. Edward knew his stuff. What he was talking about was very theosophical for the most part. It was very mystical, but he made it very apparent to his followers and for family members involved with his followers that he needed money. I need money so that we can do things. We can build a town or a city here where we can all stay, and we'll also have this other place on this other island that we can use as well for all of our followers. But there's a lot of shit I need to build. More than anything, I need money. which he got. And then when everything went to shit, police got involved, members, they all left due to mendacity and infighting and stuff like this. Brother 12, Edward Wilson, he panicked. It is said that he took a lot of his money, that I believe it was gold, because he loved gold. So he would ask for donations. When people, his followers, would give him donations, he's like, don't give me paper money, give me gold. So when everything went to shit, he took all of this gold and he put it in mason jars, and that he took it to one of the islands where he was building a settlement. And he took all of this gold and he buried it somewhere on this island, where it is said by the locals to this very day, it is still buried. Nobody has found this treasure, and apparently it would be worth something like $5 million these days, something like that. But of all the things that people from the area that is my new home, the thing they always want to ask me about is if I know about this buried treasure of Brother 12. It is indeed a fascinating story, but it also has that enticement, right? That thing that really a lot of us have a fascination. Is it this ever burning ember within us? The idea of finding treasure. Yet that's not the reason you're here. That's not the reason you're listening to this podcast. This is not what treasure is this. This is not what treasure hunt is this. This is what magic is this. And indeed, while to myself, and maybe even certainly to you, the idea of treasure hunting is a fascinating and a fun one, what could be even better than sprinkling in a dash of Western ritual magic? Now, I know for a fact some of you have probably never even heard anything about this, that this is going to be entirely new information for you. That's awesome. For some of you, you might have come across it. You read a grimoire and there's a spell in there for finding treasure. And you're just like, oh, interesting. Yeah, this is probably a bit fanciful. Let's get to the demon summoning kind of stuff, or the seals of Solomon and stuff like that. So you're familiar with it, but you don't really know too much about it. And then there's a few of you. I know that they're out there that when this episode drops, you are rubbing your hands together like Scrooge McDuck. Just, oh yeah, here we go. This is the good stuff. And truthfully, it's something that doesn't get talked about enough as a really fascinating period of European history. But more than that, an incredibly fascinating aspect of the Western ritual magic tradition. This continuum. For a while, magical treasure hunting was a big part of it. For some folks, that's what magic was for. No matter which way you approach this treasure hunting via the use of ritual magic, there's just something about it that is so unbelievably human. And more than that, it goes to the heart of the Western mind, or the Western soul, whatever you want to. There's something about treasure hunting and ritual magic that has lessons just all over the place if you go seeking them, and if you wish to learn the lessons. And the lessons aren't just merely avarice and cupidity are bad and can cause a downfall, and we should not lust for such things. Those are easy. That's the surface level stuff. That's what you see. And let me tell you, there are some real lessons, particularly involving groups. I'll get into it, obviously. But that's the stuff you see up top. Stuff that's beneath the roots of this kind of thing. Truly, the buried aspect of this, the underground aspect of ritual magic treasure hunting, it's just a trove of very important aspects of what we consider, the pre-modern and the modern world. The seeking of wealth with the assistance of magic goes to the core of us and of magic itself. So we're going to bite this off in a couple of easy to chew chunks. So let's first talk about treasure and the history of treasure in a way. And then we'll talk for a little bit about treasure hunting. And then we'll get to the reason. Again, what treasure hunting is this is not the program. What magic is this? Let's talk about summoning spirits and demons to assist us in finding buried treasure. Because for the most part, that's what it is. That's what was happening. People were summoning spirits to assist with finding things that people had buried. What exactly is treasure? What is this thing that we all know treasure, right? Can be used metaphorically. Usually it is ascribed to anything that we consider to have some kind of value. It could be a person. That person, my girlfriend is my treasure. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking here about, let's be specific, right? Let's get as specific as we can on what magic is this. Let's talk about the what. The what in this case are treasure hoards, a treasure trove. Usually what a treasure is in this case, it is things that are of value, monetary, usually, value or precious value, things like stones and crystals, gems, even something, and this should speak to the those of you that are like me, very much huge fans of none other than Dr. Indiana Jones, the fictional character. They could also be things like artifacts, things that, they don't glimmer or shine like stones and gold, but they could very well be something that could at some point be quite prized. Let's get even more pedantic. Treasure is not something that is natural. It's not like people are treasure hunting to find a gold reserve in the earth. No, people are trying to find hidden things that are an unnatural part of the landscape, usually buried in the landscape or hidden somewhere, sometimes hidden in little parts of a tree, perhaps, or buried at the roots of the tree, but they're put there by other people. That's how you get treasure. But besides the content of such things as treasure troves or treasure hoards, that kind of thing, the most distinctive aspect of treasure is that it is hard to find. Most of the time, purposefully so. And of course, because things are hard, specifically treasure is hard. When something becomes hard, a need is created. A profession is created. A label is created. And that is a treasure hunter, a treasure seeker, an expert that can apply their skills and expertise to make the hard thing not as hard. Who could be a treasure seeker? For the most part, anybody. Right? Sure. This is, of course, a very loose definition, right? Both treasure and treasure seekers. There's treasure. Treasure is valuable. It's buried usually. It's hidden. It's lost. Hard to find. Then there are those who say that they can find it, who think that they can find it, or who tell other people that they can find it, that this is what they do. And throughout history, basically over the last 2,000 years, because we have slight evidence that this kind of thing existed in antiquity, but more so in the, let's call it, early modern period of Western cultural history. There was the belief, because they lived in a still very magical world, a world in which believed in the efficacy of magic, and that there was a world of spirits that surrounded them, that one could use magic to assist in finding these hard-to-find things. And a lot of times, these treasure hunters, these treasure seekers, were themselves, or purported to be, magicians. Not all of them, but a lot of them. All right, right? So that's the what. That's the what of all of this kind of thing. That's for those of you that have come into this thing cold, right? I've given you almost all you need to know as far as the broadest of information as to what this episode's going to be about. Let's grab a shovel. Let's all of us grab our shovels because we're going to start digging. Let's go deeper on this one. The first and obvious question that needs answering should be this one. Why on earth is there treasure in the first place? This is where things get a little bit blurry because there are historic attestations of people finding buried treasure in the last 2,000 years, but we're going to be a bit more specific since about the 15th century onwards. And in many instances, this treasure, for the most part, is not what we'd like to consider as, the treasure that exists in my mind and in your mind, you listening right now. What is being found are archaeological artifacts for the most part. Not all of the things being found are what we can consider riches, but that amongst the things found is something that was viewed at the time as being valuable, i.e. things like gold or jewels. The distinction between archaeological artifact and treasure is a discussion I don't want to get too deeply into. All one can say is that for most people in the past, if it's hidden, it might as well just be treasure. It's treasure. A lot of times these artifacts, these archaeological artifacts, are not buried purposefully. It's just somehow they were misplaced and covered up, or something happened, and as a happenstance, they're just hidden. Let us speak now towards the purposefully hidden treasure. Why is this happening? You see, for reasons that I'm going to get to, magical treasure hunting pretty much hit its peak from about the 15th century to the late 18th century, for the most part. It is speculated that one of the reasons that this is the case is also the key to understanding why there was the idea that there was so much buried treasure. And I say the idea because this period of time, which I would like to use as an example, most likely it was thought that there was more buried treasure than there actually was. Yet the idea of buried treasure was huge. What was mainly happening in Europe in this period of time? I have talked about it on previous episodes, mainly the episode on demonology, but we are talking about a huge amount of social upheaval as well as crises, both real and metaphysical. One major one being the Protestant Reformation. There was a sharp increase in military conflicts that occurred around this time, sometimes due to this Protestant Reformation. And what we see happening all across Europe is before the growth and proliferation of institutionalized banks. When crisis was moving towards you, when crisis would be coming to your doorstep, what a lot of people did in this period of time was hide or bury their valuables. Not just their valuables, and a lot of times just their belongings. What we saw was the frequency in which war was the going state of affairs in a lot of people's lives. People would bury their valuables. And this seemed to be a common state of affairs for, well, forever. For as long as we have had some kind of civilization. Speaking in very broad terms, what we can also say is a lot of the time, not just this time period that I'm talking about and using as an example, but all the way back again to the very beginning of what we can call quote unquote civilization, is a lot of the things that would get hidden would stay hidden. They'd be forgotten, or the people that put them in the ground or hid them in the first place would be unable to retrieve them. This is treasure. And again, in some way, this can also create hoards, what we would probably tip into that narrative treasure of the archaeological artifact being found as treasure. Now, of course, I'm talking in a very general sense here. This is not the only reason that people buried their valuables or things of value, mainly due to war and crisis. Indeed, crisis is very broad, and it's so broad that anything could be considered a crisis. Crises, illness, pandemics, all of these kind of things. But for the most part, when we look back through history, we find people hiding their valuables when shit hits the fan or shit is about to hit the fan. There is another aspect to this that I would be remiss to not mention, and unfortunately I can only be even more broad about this as well, is that within European culture, a major element to treasure itself is what we can call story, or what we can call narrative, mythology, and even some people would call it such things as folklore in some rather specific instances. But tales such as the legendary hero of Norse mythology, Sigurd, who in short killed a dragon and gained a treasure hoard, to the portrayal of treasure that we have in such things as Beowulf, even something like the 13 Treasures of the Island of Britain, which are a series of always 13 magical items within Welsh mythology. Imaginary treasures add almost as much to the lore of treasure as actual real treasure itself. And within such things as the mythological aspect of treasure, you have always what arises is an archetypal character surrounding treasure. And this, of course, would be those who seek it, which, as I mentioned, and this is, of course, within the waking world, a treasure seeker could be almost anybody. Anybody could cast themselves as that archetype. The hero, the explorer, the lovable rogue even, they themselves would cast themselves into a near mythological role, even if they weren't good at it, or in most cases had probably not found anything of value ever. Some of you very well might be asking, where does magic enter into the equation? Historically, when we look back, when can we say that there has been a supernatural, a paranormal, a magical element to treasure? And the answer to that is always. Treasure has seemingly, at least within a Western context, has always been magical. Now, as far as this specific thing is concerned, the very topic of this episode, magical treasure hunting, as mentioned, it's a forgotten art. It is a forgotten aspect of magic and the occult within the Western continuum. And apart from those who absolutely love the history of magic, witchcraft, and the occult, most people have no idea that this was a thing, and therefore interest in it is not, I'm just going to say, at a premium these days, and finding information about this very cool, I think, very fascinating, very interesting aspect of magic and its history, there's basically only one, you heard me, basically only one book that actually deals with this thing. Sure, there are certainly books like the Cunning Man's Handbook that have chapters on treasure hunting and magic, but for all intents and purposes, there's literally just one book. And that book is called Magical Treasure Hunting in Europe and North America, A History by Johannes Dillinger. Fantastic book, well worth grabbing if you've got the cash, because it is very expensive, but if you have a friend who's a professor at a university or something like that, or even you can ask your library to try and find a digital copy, it is available. Just going to say right off the bat here, pretty much 75% of what I'm going to talk about in this episode is going to come straight from Johannes's book. It's a gooder. And I will say, if you consider yourself a student of the history of magic within the West and you have not read this book, you need to. This is one that you absolutely have to read. Now, as I am wont to do on the What Magic Is This podcast, for the most part, I like to contain the Western ritual magic tradition. For the most part, I tend to get that starter's pistol and fire it in and around the time in which the scrolls that make up the Greek magical papyri were composed. So, 100 BC to about 400 AD. I know that's a very long period of time, but there you have it. Were people using magic to find treasure in and around the time that this Greek magical papyri was composed? You better believe it. Let's head to Cypriansville, and by that I mean Antioch. Antioch now in an area that is Turkey, so we're talking Eastern Mediterranean. Fascinating place. Again, if you like the history of magic and the occult, you got to know about Antioch. It was a center of the nascent religion we know today as Christianity, but there were people there, specifically in and around the 4th century or so, that attempted to remain pagan, Greek pagan. One of these folks was a Greek teacher of rhetoric of the sophist school. What that basically means is that this dude was a propeller head. He was somebody who was known for their thinking. A nerd. A nerd by the name of, I'm going to butcher it, and I know people that are classicists just hate it when I try to pronounce Greek names, but I'm going to do it anyways. Libanius. Our dude Libanius was known for going into public and making speeches or orations or declarations, and people would then write down what he said or just the gist of what he was trying to say. At one point, he is directing some vitriol towards a known local magician or goess. Anyways, this speech was, at least a segment of his speech, is kind of taking the piss. At one point, he says to this professed magician or goess, "Why has your magic not opened up for you all the treasuries? And why has it not joined everything which currently lies buried in the earth to your estate?" It's interesting stuff, an interesting thing to say, and it is the contention of, I got this quote from a book by Dr. Stephen Skinner, which is Techniques of Solomonic Magic. Fantastic book anyways. And I kind of agree with Dr. Skinner here, is that this is basically showing that something that the goess or magicians in and around the Eastern Mediterranean were trained to do, or at least they said that they were trained to do, is to use their magic to find valuable things. What Libanius is doing here is, as I said, he's ripping this magician, basically saying, "Look, dude, you're still poor. You say that you can go and find valuable things in the earth. Why aren't you rich? Why are you still dressed like a poor person? Why don't you have a mansion on the hill here in Antioch yet?" Oh, that's right, because you don't know what the hell you're doing. I love this quote because it also it brings up this other contention that is and has always been a part of not just magical treasure hunting throughout the ages and from this point all the way to our modern age, but that of magic in a Western context in general, which is, and I'm sure a lot of you who are operant magicians have bumped up against this at some point, but in this case, I'm going to extrapolate a little bit, which is, if you're a magician and you say that you can change reality, and if one of the things that you do is magic that can be used to gain some kind of profit in some way, how come you're not rich? How come you say that you can do these wonderful things and you're not even able to do the thing which could provide your life with a great deal of ease, i.e., make yourself rich or even in some way financially comfortable? Yes, indeed. The skepticism around the efficacy of results-based magic has been with magic pretty much since the very beginning. And I'm pretty sure it is not going anywhere. And speaking of the beginning, you know how I mentioned that treasure has been magical always? Well, at least as long as there has been a quote unquote civilization. And what happens when human beings get into groups? They start to organize, they start to put down certain limitations and things one can and cannot do, and then those eventually turn into laws in some form or another. I don't want to spend too much time talking about law and magical treasure hunting. Johannes, in his book, has a whole chapter devoted to it. Please go there. But laws are good for us in the respect that we can actually point to something and say that, oh, this has been happening. And one of the first major aspects to magical treasure hunting has been the act itself of how one finds treasure. What I'm referring to here is whether one, just stumbles upon treasure or if one actively goes out looking for treasure. Laws put around finding treasure or looking for treasure go all the way back to the rule of the Emperor Hadrian. So that is early 2nd century. But as far as magic is concerned and treasure magic is concerned, there are laws that were ascribed to the Emperor Leo that was later inserted and put into a Roman, an Eastern Roman, i.e. Byzantine codification of law that was called the Code of Justinian. And this is the early 6th century. So what it says there is kind of the same thing that Hadrian was going for. If you stumble upon treasure, particularly if it's your property, that's okay. But as far as this law on using magic to find treasure, this is what it says in the Code of Justinian. Let no one hereafter annoy us with petitions having reference to treasure found either by himself or by someone else upon his own land or upon that of another. For we give full power to everyone to seek treasure on his own premises, provided he does so without the practice of wicked arts and sacrifices punishable by law or by any other prohibited means. So you heard it. Wicked arts as well as sacrifices to try and find treasure. That's magic. Don't use magic to try and find treasure. That is punishable by law. And of course, what must be said is that if there's laws around things, chances are the reason that there is that people are doing it. In some cases, people are probably doing it quite a bit. There's a series of words that are used in this Code of Justinian that I find very interesting, and I would be remiss if I didn't bring it up. That religion, organized religion, particularly that of Christianity and all that goes along with early Christianity and even medieval Christianity, helped fuel in some way the religiosity of finding treasure. In this case, the words are used, if you find treasure by the kindness of deity, then that means the treasure is yours. It also mentions that you probably let the authorities know about it, but good luck with that kind of thing. But also, I want to just bring up somewhat briefly the odd necromancy of early Christianity, and particularly that of the lore and significance belonging to relics of the saints. It is hard for us to imagine now in any way, shape, or form the spiritual importance that the saints had, particularly martyred saints had on early Christianity, and the collection of these relics. If you're unsure about what I'm talking about here, these could be things like clothing that belonged to the saints, jewelry perhaps that belonged to them, but in a lot of cases, the good stuff, the most important stuff, was body parts and bones. Yes, the spooky stuff. These specific treasures were very important. Of course, there was a lot of fraud, as there is a ton of fraud involved in magical treasure hunting. But specifically for these relics, of course, many people could try and make certain things and pass them off as being a relic involved in a saint. And it was mainly due to the fact that it was big business. If you had a relic from a saint and put it in your church, you can count that there's going to be pilgrims that make a pilgrimage to your church because of that relic. It's also pretty hard for us to imagine, and Johannes Dillinger brings this up, and I'm basically going to mention it as well because it is worth mentioning, that we also have a hard time differentiating between the spiritual and the material and the value of each. And that our conceptions of an object having spiritual value and something having material value in the Middle Ages, when let's call it the cult of relics really shifted into a higher gear, the differentiation between spiritual and material just didn't really make sense. They were seen as being incredibly valuable, but not in the sense, we can call it, oh, this is a priceless relic, a priceless artifact. It's just that wouldn't be a thing. There was a supreme divine importance to these relics that seemingly goes beyond very different times, very different conceptions as to what is important and valuable. What can be said about saints and treasure is that a lot of times the whereabouts or the location of the resting place of bodies of the saints themselves are just unknown. And so people would go searching for them. In a way, the body of the saint was a treasure itself. And finding it to be able to get relics from such a body would be a hunt in and of itself. As a small little aside, I also have to mention this because, again, super fascinating to me, and it's got parallels within the paranormal. But people that would hunt for relics would testify when they had found relics that they were guided to certain spots, particularly spots where the body of a saint might be, or that there might be a special relic that is from one of the apostles or things of this variety, that they knew where to look or that they knew the spot where the thing was because there was either flames or some kind of bluish lights in the sky. It's an incredibly fascinating bit of lore that I don't see enough people talk about. Of course, the skeptic could just say that these people are just saying the same things because they've just heard the same things from others earlier, time and time again. It just becomes a story that people tell when they've found things or they're trying to sell certain relics. But there's modern, and as in modern as in like a couple of decades ago, attestations of people saying that they were guided to a certain area that does have like a hoard or does have some kind of treasure or an archaeological artifact, that the lights were there. There was some kind of lights in the sky and that they were guided there by the flame or by these bluish lights. Back in the day, again, back in like the medieval era, the Middle Ages, if you will, a lot of times there was thought that the love and light of God was great, and he wanted it to be visible to all people. So he obviously wanted the important aspects of his awesomeness to be found, right? So in a way, he wants to guide those looking for the things that are important to them, to the supreme deity. But yes, guiding lights are indeed an aspect of treasure hunting that's even going all the way to people finding treasure not too long ago. But this little bit of lore also we see making its way all the way into the early modern period. There's, in a lot of cases, there's talk that people want to go looking for treasure or know that there's treasure in a spot because they see flames in the sky or blue lights in the sky. Anyways, stay on target. Without a doubt, it really is one of those things that we have to pay credence to, both the cult of the saints and the cult of relics, and finding relics as adding a huge part and in a way helping fuel the allure of trying to find treasure, but also adding to that the spiritual or magical aspect of the treasure itself. Let's take a moment now to just briefly bring up some of the stranger beliefs involving the treasure itself. Literally, the treasure, the thing that's hidden or buried. For a time, there was a belief that the treasure, the buried treasure, was in some way able to move locations, that if you went looking for it, it could in some way evade your hunting for it. But not only that, in some respects, there's this is written down, this is attested to, that the treasure can actually, we would we would use the term shapeshift, that it can change itself, it can make itself not valuable. And when you go looking for it, if you're not following certain protocols, or you're not in a way worthy of finding this treasure, that it can be gold and silver and jewels, and it can just morph. It can shift into being, I don't know, some dirty buried undergarments or something like that, right? But there's this other thing that that definitely has to be mentioned, that a common belief that occurred in continental Europe as well was this idea that to prevent this kind of morphing, or the moving, or the teleporting of treasure, the best way to prevent these things from happening when you're going looking for it is that you yourself, the treasure hunters, or the magician that you hire to hunt the treasure for you, can in a way fish or lure the treasure out, or make sure that it stays treasure by burying or using a small amount of gold or silver, or a jewel or a crystal or something like that. So yeah, but before you go looking for treasure, you got to make sure you got like a little bit of treasure, a little bit of gold yourself, and then you give it to the magician or the cunning man who go look for it. I'm just going to say cunning man for the most part, because basically almost every written record that we have of treasure hunting, it's a sausage party. It's mostly men that are doing this thing, the hunters, the treasure hunters, right? I've got some numbers for you. This is from a wonderful book, definitely one worth looking at, called Love Spells and Lost Treasure: Service Magic in England from the Later Middle Ages to the Early Modern Era, by Tabitha Stanmore. Again, really great book. In their databases of actual legal cases involving magic and magicians doing magic, she's got about 34 cases of treasure hunting that were brought to court, and I believe 32 of those cases are men. It's men doing this. Not all. There's 2 other cases in which it's women doing the cunning search for lost treasure, but for the most part, it's not just the case in England that it's men doing this. It's also continental Europe. It's mostly guys. Fortune and glory, kid. As a diversion within this diversion, I just want people to understand that the allure of treasure was so strong that it became such a huge aspect of magic that almost everybody did it. Every magician did it, or they were in some way adjacent to it. When you think of, historic magician, who are you going to think of? Like earlier than, the 19th and 20th century, most likely John Dee is going to come to your mind, right? He's the big one. He's the famous one. He's as close as we have in the English world, or even the European world, to a grand wizard, right? There's this idea that he was doing a very special kind of magic. That he was doing Enochian magic, his angel magic, his highfalutin, scrying, austere, looking into different dimensions and talking to weird dimensional beings, and side quest and wife swapping. Johnny Boy was not above looking for that treasure. In fact, it's probably should be brought up a lot more when we talk about John Dee. We have record of a proposition that he made to the chief advisor of Queen Elizabeth I, William Cecil, that he, John Dee, should be licensed and financed to use his magic to find treasure for the Queen, of course. In his words, he says, "How great a commodity should it be for the Queen Majesty and the Commonwealth of this kingdom." It never happened, but it didn't stop John Dee from doing his own kind of treasure hunting. It was part of his magical world. It was part of the magical world at that time. Anyhow, back on track. You can tell I'm excited about this kind of stuff because I veer off. I know most episodes I go on wild tangents that I'll be talking about one thing and then I'll go talk about something completely different, but still kind of about the same thing, and then I'll circle back. But for this one, it's happening a lot because I love this stuff. This is really cool shit. All right, okay, you've got some gold, and you want to find even more gold, so you give it to this cunning man, and then he'll use it to lure or make sure that the treasure stays treasure. How they do this, according to the cunning man, is that they will bury it, and then they're going to dig. They're going to dig around where the suspected treasure is, just so it can't get away. It can't, squirrel through the earth itself. And luckily, because you gave the cunning man gold that he then buried, the gold that's already there will stay gold. They have assured you of this. All right, I guarantee most of you know where this is going, right? Most of the time when this would happen, you'd give a somewhat shabby looking service magician, this cunning man, a bit of gold to find more treasure. Sometimes they would probably come up to you and be like, "Hey, I know where there's treasure. You got some gold? Let's go find it because the treasure's going to morph or it's going to teleport." They wouldn't use those words, but you know what I'm saying. So give me some gold. We're going to lure this treasure out. We're going to fish it out. We're going to get it. But I need some gold first. And then chances are you would never see this person again. This happened a lot. Probably more than we have record of. But there was this belief. This belief was a valid one all over Europe, that treasure in some way was magical. In that animistic way, the treasure has a spirit of its own, an agency of its very own. And because of this, you need magicians, you need sorcerers, you need cunning folk, because they know a way around with their magic. They know their way around the magic of the object, the treasure itself. How exactly would one know where the treasure was? I mean, there's the popular places, of course. These would be things like ruins of earlier civilization, things like megaliths, but also things like old Roman ruins, crypts, of course. Of course, you have to go finding treasure in places where the dead are buried, right? Caves were obviously another very popular place. These could very well be the obvious examples, but what about just out in the fields or just in less obvious places? How would people go about knowing where there's treasure? Sometimes it would be sightings of anomalous things like ghosts, or again earlier, there is a long tenured tradition of spooky lights. But if you weren't being shown the way to treasure and you wanted to hunt treasure, what did folks do? What did people do? Well, in the early modern period, again, we're just going to put it in and around the 15th century to the 18th century. Chances are, if there was an area where it was suspected that there could very possibly be treasure, but you need to, in a way, hone things down a little bit, you need to focus, chances are you'd go to an astrologer. That's right, the stars would lead the way. Well, actually, to be more specific, it was the planets that they looked to for the most part. In Jim Baker's The Cunning Man's Handbook, that I know each and every one of you have, right? You have this book. If you don't, go buy this book. He's got two fantastic examples of the kind of things that astrologers would look for treasure seeking. They had elections for treasure seeking. One example is from Nicholas Culpeper. Should remember his name from my plants, trees, and herbs episode. There's also an interesting example from John Gadbury, who was a disciple and defender of William Lilly. More on him later. John Gadbury's example is well worth looking into for sure, because first of all, he goes through a section on of treasure hid if attainable, and you go through the astrology of that, and then the next section is there treasure in the place supposed? So it's kind of getting closer to finding where the treasure could possibly be, but he ends that section by basically saying, "Some conclude the Lord of the Seventh ought to show the nature and quality of the treasure. Those who have a desire may make a trial of that way, but for my part, I confess I understand no reason for it." And just kind of basically saying, you know, treasure hunting ain't my thing. So once you've got, a general area, maybe not the exact spot as to where treasure could very possibly be, if, of course, you aren't shown by ghosts or angels or things of that variety where the possibly treasure could be, how does one get really exact with where to find this treasure? A device that pops up earliest in Germany in and around the 15th century and later spread all over Europe. We see it brought up in quite a few sources as a way to pinpoint exactly where the treasure is supposed to be. And this invention, this new technology for finding treasure, is a rod. It's a dowsing rod. I hope you all know what I'm talking about. It was a stick. It was a stick that would look like a Y, and one would hold, the two prongs that come out, and one would just use this. In one sense, it's referred to as a mosaical rod. It's also been referred to as a virgula divina, divining rod. Just like a magical wand, the preferred wood that this rod would be made of would be hazel. And there's actually a really cool example of glyphs that one can carve on their magical treasure finding stick. Reginald Scott, in his absolutely essential work, Discovery of Witchcraft, which I also know you all have, right? Anyhow, has an example of the kind of glyphs that one can, or sigils one should carve into this hazel. Witch hazel, specifically. It's got to be that witch hazel. Of course, there would be those that, and a lot of times these would be cunning folk or cunning men that know how to use this rod. And then they pinpoint, they've figured out where the treasure is exactly. That should be it, right? That should be just grab some shovels, start digging. Hopefully you find something, right? No. Not so fast, bucko. You see, what goes with treasure as well, and it is something that we cannot pinpoint exactly when or where such beliefs formed or such lore came about. But in Europe specifically, treasure, especially buried treasure, was intrinsically connected to spirits. In most cases, usually malevolent ones. And these beliefs run the gamut, but the two most distinctive elements of this belief regarding the relationship between buried treasure and spirits are this. One, that spirits and entities, or even things like fairies, can assist with getting the treasure, particularly through magical ritual. But the most common belief was that spirits, demons, entities would guard the treasure, and you'd have to use magic to get them to not do that anymore so that you can get the treasure. For the most part, the European regional specifics of the relationship between spirits and treasure oscillate between these two, but for the most part, these two aspects of spirits and treasure are the big ones, because of course they require magic. Let's take a second here to actually talk about the variety of magic that would be used in both instances. Of course, we are talking about spirits, entities, fairies, demons. And so for the most part, but particularly in the pre-modern treasure hunting craze that we saw within Europe, this self-evident lore that surrounded buried treasure and its relationship with spirits meant that the variety of magic that one would need to get this treasure was, I'm going to say, the sort of magic that people would look down on for the most part. We are, of course, talking about what they at the time would have called necromancy, but which these days we would call negromancy or evocatory ritual magic. That's right. Of course, what occurred before this was a debate as to whether or not this kind of spirit centric magic, evocatory ritual magic, should be viewed in a way as being natural or good magic for the most part, and through the societies in which we have physical evidence of ritual magic, i.e., things like grimoires. This magic was very much looked down on. And in a way, it kind of, I'll just say, turns up the temperature on treasure hunting because in order to do this kind of treasure hunting, one usually has to do the spooky, scary magic. And a lot of times that would require one to have to find somebody who knows something about this kind of magic or who has these grimoires. And for those who, want to get treasure, but they don't know too much about this whole variety of magic, it already makes an enterprise which is scary enough as is, even scarier and more fraught with danger, merely due to the fact that the authorities in the societies at the time really looked down on treasure hunting as well as necromancy. So you got that 1-2 punch of you doing something that a lot of folks would consider to be a greedy and unnatural, but also doing a really unnatural form of magic in order to get the thing you're after. Now, before I get into the those two major aspects of spirits and their relationship to buried treasure, I do want to say here, for the most part, pre-modern treasure hunting was a group affair. There is some minutia regarding the kinds of people that would make up the sort of team that would go on these treasure hunts. It's fascinating enough, but for brevity's sake, I think that each and every one of you should probably have a watch of former guest Dr. Justin Sledge's excellent YouTube video on treasure magic. Of course, if you are unfamiliar with his YouTube channel, Esoterica, you best rectify that. A fantastic resource. And his video on treasure magic, some of the details of this episode are obviously going to be in there as well, but he goes through some of the finer details, like what kind of people would make up a treasure hunting team. Well worth giving it a watch. It goes without saying that a link to that video will be in the show notes to this episode. whatmagicisthis.com. All I need you to know, for the most part, right now, because I'm going to get into some examples, is that treasure hunts were usually a group of guys, and groups are fascinating in a few ways, particularly pertaining to treasure hunts. And what we are going to see is going to be some instances of this sort of thing. But one, when you got guys in a group that are after money and riches, there is a high chance that mendacity and backstabbing are going to occur, right? There's the old expression that 3 people can certainly keep a secret as long as 2 of them are dead. Another major aspect is it's hard to coordinate things when you've got more than 4 people involved. I'm sure that each and every one of you have experienced this when, you're out on a Saturday night with 5 or 6 friends. Each and every one of you is a couple of drinks to the wind, and you want to go somewhere different. So you as a group of friends need to decide? Fucking maddening stuff. We all know how difficult that is. Try adding demon magic and vast untold riches to that equation. And finally, the other thing I want to add is that fear, it seems to grow when you add more people. This might seem like a little bit out of left field here, but I'm going to go with it. The Greeks like to personify certain elements of human nature. And one of them was that they had a god of both fear, but also of panic itself, because fear leads to panic. And the name of this god was Phobos. Normally, Phobos was equated in a lot of ways with war and with battle, but I just love how the Greeks smushed fear and panic and running away as a singular deity. When you're doing something that is already perilous and you are adding demons to the mix and a kind of magic that is most likely viewed as being unnatural, when you're in the thick of it, doing some treasure hunting, when one person starts to get scared, other people start to get scared. One person's individual fear turns into a collective group fear that spreads and grows and grows. And in a lot of cases, turns to panic. These three things are major factors in a lot of the cases that we have record of regarding treasure hunting with the aid of ritual magic. Okie dokie, back to those two major aspects of spirits and buried treasure. And I'd like to talk about the latter aspect before I talk about the former one. Meaning I'd like to talk about the idea of spirits guarding treasure and that you have to use magic to try and get rid of them before talking about having the spirits aid you in finding treasure. Because from what I see, and others might be able to disagree with me on this one, but I truly don't think that having spirits bring treasure to you exists if you don't already have the idea of using magic to get spirits to go away so that you can find the treasure. It might be a chicken or egg kind of thing, but I think that the idea of guardian spirits for treasure came before asking them for assistance. Now, if there's one thing that I find lacking in the major resource for this episode, that book that I was talking about by Johannes Dillinger, Magical Treasure Hunting in Europe and North America, a History, is that he really doesn't spend enough time talking about grimoires and the kind of rituals and spells that existed in these incredibly illuminating texts and what that means to the belief of people at the time and how it could help them in their protocols for using magic in treasure hunting. Seems like a bit of a missed opportunity, but no fear, I am here to try and share the information. What I find very fascinating about the treasure hunting rituals within a lot of the grimoires, and truly, they're in a ton of grimoires, is that a lot of them are very different, but also in a way kind of samey. The magic that is usually associated and meant to address spirits or demons that are guarding certain treasures, they tend to look extremely Solomonic. Yeah, I know. I did an episode, is Solomonic magic even a thing? Just go with it here. So for a lot of cases, when there are rituals to try and get at a treasure before the actual big ritual to dig up the treasure, in some cases, folks will do those things that I mentioned earlier. They'll go to an astrologer. The astrologer does the astrology thing, and then they'll have somebody with a dowsing rod, or in some cases, sometimes people use chicken wishbones, basically to try and find the location where the treasure is near exactly. And then once that's there, you assemble the team. The team gets together. You will have members of the party, certainly, with protective apotropaic tools or articles of clothing. There will be consecrations for instruments that they're going to be bringing with them, i.e. something like a magical sword. One or a couple of the members of the team will bring with them the books to call the names, i.e. that would be the grimoire or grimoires being used. Sometimes people just don't use one book. Sometimes they would bring a couple books. In some cases, incenses would be brought, and that incense would be used in the general area where the treasure is supposed to be. In a few grimoires, what's interesting about these rituals is that a magical circle is drawn with a sword, or the circle is drawn first and then the sword obviously traces the magical circle. And what's really interesting is that the circle is the place inside the circle is the place where they're going to do their digging. In some cases, a member of the party has a lantern to help people with working, and sometimes that lantern is to be fueled by it's a weird one. I believe this is in one of the claviculas or a key of Solomon. It's a fat from a dead man, somebody who has died in the month of July. Kind of creepy. So once incense is done, once circle is drawn, and everybody's in the circle who needs to be, and sometimes the circles were quite large. In the Book of Oberon, there is a ritual in there for seeking treasure in which you make two circles, one for you, the team doing the treasure hunting, and another one that the spirits are supposed to be constrained in. Once you're ready to get to work, what happens is whoever is holding the grimoire or the books will then have these incantations. And the incantations, for the most part, are usually quite long. Couple of good examples, one being in a grimoire called The Book of Treasure Spirits. Former guest of the show and author of the Grimoire Encyclopedia, David Rankin, has an edition of the Book of Treasure Spirits out. Grab it. It's pretty cool. There's also a pretty good one in the Book of Oberon. But what happens is when the folks are doing the digging, or sometimes even before the folks start doing the digging, these incantations basically say, "Come to me, spirits," these spirits that are guarding this treasure. Come to me in the form of a man. Don't come to me in the form of a demon. Make it so that you don't scare the shit out of all of us doing our work here. Look, I know that you're guarding this stuff, and I just need you to relax. I need you to chill out. I need you to be bound to me because I am the one who will adjure you. They will usually list off the names of many different names of God. They will invoke the names of saints. Virgin Mary is usually brought up. But basically what they're saying is that all of these names, all of these powers that are behind us are stronger than you. You who are here either in the circle that I drew for you or just on the edge of the circle, the one that we are doing the work in. It also might be helpful for you to, when you do appear to us here, to give us a thumbs up or a thumbs down if we're in the right place. But even if you don't do that, I just need you to know that we're going to do this thing. We're digging here. Make sure that the treasure doesn't move away. Make sure that you or perhaps any of your cronies, because again, it's not just one spirit guarding this stuff. It's in many cases, it's like a host of spirits guarding these treasures. But with these words that I'm using and the magic that we're using, we need you to make sure that you don't move the treasure away while we are working. A word that comes up again and again and again in a lot of these rituals that I've found in the grimoires is don't hinder us in our work. Don't get us off our game. Don't try and distract us. And even more than that, that once we have the treasure, that we be allowed to take it away and you won't follow us or curse us or anything like that. Basically, what's happening is that they are evoking the guardian spirits of the treasure and trying to put the fear of God into these spirits because, of course, the magicians, they know the big names, and that fear itself will cause the spirits not to induce their own form of fear or terror within the party that is doing the magical treasure hunting. As I have said, it is extremely fascinating stuff. And yeah, a lot of the things that would be familiar to people that enjoy looking at or studying or downright getting their hands dirty and doing negromancy or evocatory spirit ritual magic. Almost all the details are there. There's a couple of minor tweaks. One being, that in some cases you're doing digging inside. You're doing, or somebody, one of your party is doing the work of digging inside the circle. When you look at these grimoires and you look at these rituals and the incantations and the things that they do in order to get to actually digging up the treasure once they think they know that they are in the area, it's very clear that just due to the length of a lot of the incantations, that they really do believe that the spirits are in some way guarding the treasure and that they can do some kind of harm to those who go and seek it and are actually going through the act of trying to procure it. But also always towards the end of the ritual is that license to depart, and just to make sure that, once we have this treasure, we're done here. Things are good. I mean, I might call on you, probably won't. It's a possibility, but we just need to make sure that once we've gone through this ritual, we get away scot-free with this stuff and you're not going to follow us. Nothing bad's going to happen to us afterwards. Because we're doing the things. We're going through this process. But yes, certainly basically undergirding all of this is the real belief that these spirits, these guardians of this stuff, can and will harm you if you don't do the right things. One of the more notorious examples of magical treasure hunting that we have that's not in court records, but is actually within an autobiography of somebody who was in a way magically operant, but in this case they were more of an astrologer. That would be the case of when the infamous 17th century astrologer William Lilly took part in a magical treasure hunt. But not just any old place and not out in a field. No. He did this in one of the most famous Gothic churches in Europe and definitely in England. That's Westminster Abbey. This is an interesting story just because it's got some of the details. And while we are not too sure what materials were used as far as if there was something like a Solomonic ritual in some way, he does mention the use of dowsing rods. In his words, he calls them mosaical rods. Before I get going with telling this story, I do need to mention it's crazy. And it's not until William Lilly in his autobiography, Life and Times, 1602 to 1681. Anyhow, remember how I said that there's usually a group of people that do treasure hunting, obviously. In this case, William Lilly says that there were 30 people involved in this endeavor. 30 people. Already that's way too many people. So what happens is that the official clockmaker for the king was somehow, in some way, who knows how, it's not really mentioned how, but he says he knows that there's treasure in this great church, Westminster Abbey. I would really hope most people know about this church. I'm no royalist in any way, shape, or form, but you should probably know what happens at Westminster Abbey. That's where the coronation of English royalty occurs, in this church. It's a big deal. Anyhow, this friend of William Lilly somehow knows that there's treasure in this very important church. And he goes to the bishop, says, there's treasure in this church. I need your permission to go look for it. And the bishop says, sure, as long as you give me half. Hands are shook. The deal is done. Easy, right? So this guy, not the bishop, the other one, William Lilly's friend, gathers up another dude that's really good with using dowsing rods to find treasure. And he also asks William Lilly, hey, you seem to know what you're talking about as far as, the occult and what's happening up there in the starry skies. Why don't you come along and help out as well? William Lilly says, sure. Let's think about this. Would you say no? If given an opportunity to go to a Gothic church and somebody's like, I have permission to go in there and look for treasure, you think you could say no? I know I wouldn't be able to say no. I'd be like, sign me up. I'm there in a flash. So they get to Westminster Abbey. The whole party's there, all 30 of them. The gentleman with the dowsing rods, he starts doing his dowsing rod thing at one point while they are going over the cloisters here in the church. They start going crazy. He says, this is the spot. This is where we got to go. This is where we got to dig. And so who knows what magic they did before they started digging. But anyways, all they do is they do dig. And then they find a coffin. They find a coffin. They dig it up. But it is very light, this coffin. And everybody involved in the digging up of this coffin is kind of like, there's probably not any kind of gold or anything valuable in there. We should probably just put this back and to put the earth back on it, which is what they do. And William Lilly is very sure to mention in his autobiography that everybody does this and everybody's really dismayed that they just dug up a body, kind of did that thing that you do with Christmas presents, hold it against your ear and kind of like shake it. What's in there? But they did this with a human body, with human remains, right? And can you just imagine the sound of bones rattling within a coffin? And then they just all go, It's way too light to have any treasure. We should probably just put it back. The words that William Lilly uses exactly is, we afterwards much repented. So already they got this going against them. They feel pretty bad about disturbing the dead, and then so they go and look elsewhere. So they go into the main church, and again, this is way before there's any kind of electric light. They've got candles and torches. As soon as they step into the hall there, a massive wind moves straight through, blows out all of the torches except for like a couple that are greatly dimmed. This is not an outside church, by the way. Like, the doors aren't just open. This is an enclosed space. Without a doubt, people get freaked. People are like, what the heck is going on here? Remember what I'm talking about earlier. This idea of phobos most likely starts to come over these people. They start to get a little bit freaked out. Who knows if it's an exaggeration, but William Lilly says that the wind was so strong that he felt like one side of the church was going to fall on them. Apparently, William Lilly had some kind of grimoire or something that was magical, because at this point he looks at his friend, or the dude with the dowsing rods, and says he looks terrified. He's pale. He's completely white as a ghost. Other folks within the party are definitely not doing well after this giant gust of wind. The wind doesn't abate though. Like, it's continuously windy. Like, there's a giant gust and then it maintains. The wind stays. It's not going anywhere, and it's freaking the party out. So William Lilly basically whips open his book of magical incantations, and he feels he has to say something. And so he addresses the demons guarding this treasure, or just the spirits who are here in this church. Spirits, demons, if you are here, go away. Leave us alone. At which point, apparently, the wind just dies. It's done. It's like a light switch has been flipped. Just the wind completely stops, which truthfully probably also freaked everybody else out. So what happens is that the treasure hunting party, it stops abruptly. Everybody's just like, that's enough for us. And they basically all go home. And all of this happens before midnight, right? They're not out there for very long. William Lilly ends this story by basically saying a couple of things. The first one being like, if I hadn't done that incantation, that dismissal of the spirits, I'm pretty sure that the church very well, or at least one part of the church, would have fallen on us, and it probably would have killed us. But he also says a couple of things as far as treasure hunting in general. He says, first, I quote, secrecy and intelligent operators with a strong confidence and knowledge of what they are doing are best left for this work, unquote, as well as, and he's talking about himself here, I could never since be induced to join with any in such like actions, which is just a fancy way of saying that he doesn't like treasure hunting. It was also his opinion that 30 people is just way too many people, and throughout the process in this church, most likely the way in which some members of this party conducted themselves were probably not the best. There was laughing and joking and farting probably, and sex jokes and all of that kind of stuff. And it was all fun and games until it wasn't, which is when the guardian spirits decided to show up and shut them up. I absolutely love that story. I think it's a great story. But also I just want people to realize, right, that this is the mid-17th century. The belief in treasure spirits was still very much alive and very strong at this period of time. And it still continued for at least another 150 years after this, even more than that, actually. This is but one example of a kind of fear that groups of treasure hunters had regarding the spirits that would guard certain treasures. There's another wonderful example that I have of treasure hunting gone wrong, with a great deal of fear involving guardian treasure spirits, which actually leads to death. Anyways, it is a fantastic story. I shared it on the What Magic Is This Patreon a few weeks ago. Well worth giving it a listen. I will have a little snippet of it at the end of this episode. But yes, it's quite fascinating. I know I've said that word a lot this episode, but I'm going to say it again. It's quite fascinating, just the level of belief that people had regarding these treasure spirits. A belief so strong that in this instance, in a city in Germany, a very well-educated city in Germany, might I add, that the belief was so strong that it would have people throw personal safety out the window. The variety of lore that exists around guardian spirits, and in most cases, it's ghosts. A lot of times, it's ghosts that guard treasure, specifically the ghosts of the people that buried the treasure, right? But the lore that surrounds what kinds of entities is very fascinating, and it's quite vast, actually. So yeah, you got ghosts. There's attestations that the treasure is guarded by the fair folk or by fairies. Even in such articles as the clavicula that I mentioned earlier here, the Key of Solomon that I mentioned, they give the name as to the kind of spirits that guard buried treasure in the earth. They give them a name. Actually, let me just read it. Isn't that better? Let me just read what it says in this grimoire. The earth being inhabited by a great number of celestial beings and spirits, who by their subtlety and provision know the places wherein treasures are hidden, and seeing that it often happeneth that those men who undertake a search for these said treasures are molested and sometimes put to death by the aforesaid spirits, which are called gnomes. That's right, gnomes. You know, those little things that your mother-in-law has in her garden? Yeah, those things. They'll kill you. Anyhow, it's a really fascinating bit of lore within this Key of Solomon. And it just goes on to say that, that the gnomes want this treasure and they're going to try and keep it from you because they know that you are probably going to use it for something that they don't want you to use it for. So they'll, if you're looking for it, they'll straight up kill you, these gnomes. But if you have the proper tools and you use this grimoire, you can, in a way, stop them from doing you any harm and from molesting you. So there you go. But yes, as I said, ghosts are a big one. Fairies are also fairly big. Infernal spirits and demons, as well as things like gnomes. There you are. Now you gnome. But what of that earlier aspect of spirits and their relation to treasure that I mentioned earlier? This idea that, let's just say, you don't want to do too much work, but that you know someone or you yourself have the ability of conjuring spirits and having them, in some regards, bring you the treasure. But in most cases, it was that they would show you exactly where the treasure is. This is something that I see happening a little bit later on. Particularly, this occurs quite a bit in the French Bibliothèque Bleue grimoires, or the blue grimoires. It's fascinating. In the Grand Grimoire, one of the magical circles, it's quite fascinating to look at. It has a circle and then a triangle within the circle, and there's some candles or some lamps there. But there's also a little, almost like a runway from the center of the circle, or close to the center of the circle, to the outside of the circle itself, and it's called the Route du Trésor, or the treasure route. And that was believed to be the route in which, when the spirits actually have the treasure, that they bring it to you, and they will go down this path to bring you the treasure. It's like a little access route for the spirits to have them bring you the riches. The Grand Grimoire is a fascinating grimoire, and there's lots of iterations of this kind of magical circle that has a little route for spirits to bring you treasure, but there's some other kind of weird, funky stuff within those magic circles. Anyways, I'm getting off target once again. Now, remember when I would talk about grimoires that would list quite a few names of spirits, best exemplified, of course, by such a grimoire like the Ars Goetia. A lot of times in the listing of the spirits, it actually has their abilities, and quite a few spirits that go through not just the Ars Goetia, but in other grimoires. Some of them list their duties or their offices as finding treasures hid or telling you where there is treasure. Such spirits as Barbatos, Person, otherwise known as Curson, Golmari, or Daemon. But yes, if you follow certain protocols, you have certain grimoires, and you know specifically which kind of spirits you want to seek out, that they will not so much be a guardian spirit, but they will be a helping spirit. They will help you and assist you with you trying to find treasure. Let's have another example. And this is a story. It is one that is attested to in, again, the Cunning Man's Handbook by Jim Baker. We all have this book, right? We all have it. There's a lovely little summary in there of this example that I'm going to talk about, but truly the one place that I would direct you if you want to learn more about this story. It's in probably one of my favorite releases of any book related in any way to magic and witchcraft and the occult in the last 10 years. It's released through the Penn State University Press's Magic and History Sourcebooks series. The book itself is called The Magic of Rogues, Necromancers in Early Tudor England by Frank Claassen and Sharon Hubbs Wright. This book is wonderful because not only does it go through court records of 2 instances of necromancy in early Tudor England, but it gives you the background as to what happened, what went on with these 2 cases, and what the courts thought of them, the punishments. But in my opinion, the most awesome thing about this book is that what is included alongside the academic research that Frank and Sharon do on these 2 instances, including the transcriptions of the actual legal documents themselves, including examinations and that sort of thing, but that they actually include the translated grimoire sections that were most likely used in these 2 instances. Again, this is a fantastic work. I know I've been throwing a lot of must-own books at you folks for this episode. This one, I adore this book. It is amazing. And what a title, The Magic of Rogues. So what are we going to talk about here? What is the example we are going to use of a spirit being solicited to help with finding buried treasure? Well, we have to talk, in this case, about the Fellowship of the Mixendale Horde. Now, this case and the people involved were... nothing really happened very fast back in the day, and this was attested to in the court records of the Archbishop of York. All of the events that I'm going to talk about took place in and around the early 16th century, in and around, let's get specific, 1509 and 1510. Whatever happened and the things that transpired in this event, a lot of rumors spread and a lot of stories were told as to what happened with the participants and what they got up to and all of these kind of things. But more than anything, besides this just being an example of them trying to use a spirit to help them find treasure at one point, this is a very, dare I say, human story. And by that I mean it's a bit farcical. You'll see what I mean. Anyhow, the stage is Yorkshire, specifically the town of Bingley. This is in England, of course. We should all know where Yorkshire is, right? Very good pig country. There's a lot of details to this case, and I can't go into every single small one of them, so I'm just going to give you the magically pertinent information. It starts with a character by the name of William Wilson, otherwise known as William Otwell. He was a servant. He heard the story of a local in Bingley who was walking in a field, and while he was walking, there was a hole in the ground, and he peered into the hole, and he could see what looked like a chest of some sort. But when he put his sword into the hole to try and just make sure that what he was touching was solid in some way, according to this local, the devil broke his sword, snapped it in half like a toothpick snap, and then he saw as the treasure was pulled deeper into the earth. William heard this story, and so he needed to assemble a crew, and that he did. He assembled 9 people, I believe. When they actually do the treasure hunt, it's going to be 8 participants and 1 witness. The participants range to being servants like William, the person that William was the servant to, 3 priests, a cunning man who was a former grammar school teacher, even a local merchant who at one time was sheriff of Bingley, as well as the mayor of Bingley. So yes, about 8, 9 individuals involved. This made up what is known as the Mixendale Fellowship. Anyhow, they decided somewhat fairly early on in their treasure hunting endeavor that they needed to use magic. And of course, the kind of magic to be used was necromancy, or what we would call negromancy now. Eventually, the grimoires, or the texts that they would use, both before, during, and after the actual treasure hunt itself, range from a text called the Speculum Astronomiae to a text that is very similar to the kind of things that we find in Reginald Scott's The Discovery of Witchcraft, specifically pertaining to the spirits that are listed there. Part of the ritual required for a couple of the treasure hunters to have to swear upon a book, and the book in which they most likely did this was the Sworn Book of Honorius, otherwise known as Liber Iuratus, which at this point would have been infamous. And finally, the grimoire in which they got a ton of their protocols and the rituals from for this whole treasure hunt expedition was called the Treasury of Spirits, otherwise known as Thesaurus Spiritum. Once a night had been decided on which they were going to do their rituals, the general location which they were all going to head to that night, there were things to be done before the hunt itself. A crown had to be made, a scepter was also made. There were magic circles of protection made from virgin parchment. Things to be brought would have been a portable altar, lamps, holy water, copies of the grimoires or books of conjuring that they were to be using that have the incantations in them. This was a big to do. There was a lot that needed to be done, and on the day of the treasure hunt, it all went to shit. What happened was that they had a house that they were all to meet at the evening of the actual treasure hunt. Beforehand, they'd all gone to mass just to, make themselves spiritually clean. It was decided to be the best practice to form small groups of either 2 to 3 people, which would leave this house and head to where the treasure was supposed to be, all at different times. The reason for this is that they did not want to arouse any suspicion in any way, shape, or form. But what happened is that the weather was not too good. Apparently, there was a lot of fog or mist, and having this big group be broken up into smaller groups to be dispersed over a period of time while they made their way to the spot in which they were going to find their treasure. Several of the groups got completely lost. They headed out in completely different directions. They didn't have Google Maps, right? It was completely messed up. So that night was somewhat of a wash. They hatched another plan to try once again. And what happened is that while they were waiting before going out to do the actual treasure hunt, the whole thing descended into chaos. Everybody started arguing with each other about how much of the hoard would go to certain members of the party. The priest would get more, they get less. The cunning man, how much would he get? The Mixendale Fellowship completely blew apart before they put any shovels in the ground. And so, yes, that was it. But what happened was that several of the members of this Mixendale Fellowship, they formed an even smaller fellowship and decided to keep trying to find this treasure. It's like, but we now know the best way of doing this. We are going to get the assistance of a spirit to help us. And the name of that spirit is Oberon. Some of you might very well note that that is very close in name to the King of Fairies, Oberon. From what we can tell in the text that was used for this operation, and we have it, we have this Treasury of Spirits, this Thesaurus Spiritum. Yeah, it's not referred to, Oberon is not referred to as being a fairy. It is very clearly a spirit. The ritual itself is to be conducted in a room with 4 windows. They would create a lamina or a plate. It would be a metal plate, and it would be inscribed with names of God and names of saints, as well as sigils of other spirits, including Oberian. And that this plate would be used to evoke this spirit Oberian, which would assist them in actually finding this treasure. From the grimoire itself, it says, "Oh, you Oberian, most dazzling spirit, whose name and image are here inscribed. Come, Oberian, I invoke you. Show yourself a friend to me. By the virtue of the highest God and all of his saints, and by the king in whose legion you are lingering, and through the requests of those whose names are carved in this lamina, and by their signs, and by the virtue that you have, I conjure you that you come to me immediately in beautiful human form, not harming me nor anyone else existing on earth, but speedily come and accomplish my will." Anyways, apparently they did this ritual in this room with the 4 windows, and they created this lamina, this plate that has the figures of Oberian as well as a few other spirits, Storax, Carmelion, Caberion, and Serverion. And then we don't really know if they actually used it, because the Fellowship, for the most part, had broken up earlier. What happened when everybody got lost the first night they were supposed to do the treasure hunting is that they made such a huge mess of it that some of the groups actually hired somebody to try and show them where they were supposed to go. That person that they hired started talking. Rumors start to spread. Backstabbing started to happen. The people within the town started talking. And then before you know it, arrests were made. And that is why we have record of this complete dud of a treasure hunt. The Mixendale Fellowship. It's very silly. It's, as I said, very farcical, very human. You know, the fact that there was a fog and people got lost, and then afterwards they're like, no, let's try it again. And then when they tried it again, everybody started arguing, and then no, let's keep trying, let's keep doing things. It's just a smaller group that we got rid of the dead weight. This is the real group. We're gonna do even scarier magic. We're gonna conjure this spirit Oberian, and we're gonna create a plate, and this spirit's gonna help us. And it all just descended into an absolute shit show. Arrests were made. Many of the party had to do public penance, and from here, further rumors spread of sorcery and cunning folk and treasure. Right, it added to the ever increasing lore of searching for treasure and using magic to help you in finding treasure. So yes, it was a complete debacle. It was an absolute shit show, farcical. But here's the thing. Here's what's kind of funny and isn't it ironic, don't you think? That not too far away from where they were, in a place right beside Bingley, about 266 years after this treasure hunt took place in 1775, an enormous chest full of Roman coins was found buried in the earth. It was considered to be one of the finest treasures ever unearthed up to that point. Womp womp. Of course, a lot of the details of this case I have left out, I have excluded. Find yourself The Magic of Rogues, Necromancers in Early Tudor England. It goes through everything. And as I said, it actually has the rituals, some of the rituals that they very definitely were going to use or did use for their treasure hunt. Just a fantastic work, that book. As stated earlier, hunting for treasure has been around and has been a part of magic for a very long period of time, particularly within the Western continuum. I just shared an example from the Tudor age, so we're talking about 16th century or so. I also shared an example from the 17th century, William Lilly, so this would have been around the time of the Stuarts monarchy, leading up to the English Civil War. These two examples seem to be focused mainly on England, but I need people to understand that England wasn't the only place where this was happening. It was happening all over Europe, and it seemed to be at its height one would call it a treasure hunting craze when I say pre-modern, otherwise known as the early modern period. So we're starting at the early 16th century and going all the way to about the 18th century, a little bit into the 19th century, certainly, particularly in North America. What was going on specifically? Why was this actually happening? In his book, Johannes Dillinger basically tries to put forward a couple of the hypotheses as to why this was the case. Some say that it was because there was just more treasure to be found due to the Protestant Reformation and all of the armed conflicts that occurred as a consequence of it, and more people burying their stuff. Johannes says that might be part of it, but maybe it's not the biggest part of it. He himself has a hypothesis that it has something to do with the changing idea of money and value and what one could call emerging capitalist commerce. It's Johannes's contention that most of the traditional European societies had this underlying idea that can be called the image of limited good, that money and value was a bit of a zero-sum game, that there's only so much of it that is around, and that if you find it, you've got yourself a bit of the action. You got yourself a bit of that pie, but there's only so much pie to go around. And so one of the best ways of getting your piece of the pie in the minds of people at the time was to go looking for it. You see, before we went all crazy with this idea of being able to just create money and create value and also going out of our ways to be able to acquire money through jobs, but even beyond that, just the ambition to acquire money, profit seeking, this must seem very alien to us right now, but that specifically was in a way discouraged. It wasn't seen as being an admirable thing. I shall quote Johannes Dillinger in the conclusion to his book. He says this: material gain was only acceptable socially if it came from outside the society, such as treasure. This belonged to the magical sphere of spirits. It was a gift from demons or saints, fairies or ghosts. Thus, people who actively searched for personal gain but still shrank from violating society's norms were likely to engage in treasure hunting. The hunters violated laws and used magic, but they did adhere to the norms and values of traditional society. This is one of the essential reasons why the contemporaries hesitated to identify treasure hunting with antisocial witchcraft. Treasure hunting was an integral part of the economic magic of pre-industrial Europe. It is, I think, an interesting hypothesis, and I'm sure there are certainly aspects of that are definitely true. But I also think it's only part of the picture. I will come back to this sentiment a little bit towards the end of this one. What can be said is that once these societies started to become more industrial, we did in fact see treasure hunting diminish greatly. But nothing ever truly ever goes away. We see small glimpses of things through history wherever we go. As mentioned, magical treasure hunting was something that did not truly go away in the 19th century. It was very popular within North America, particularly in places like Eastern Canada and the Eastern United States. There are a lot of cases of magical treasure hunting within the only truly French province here in Canada, Quebec, from the 19th century. Of course, I would be remiss to not bring up the fact that all of the books and rituals that have magic and its use for finding treasures, as well as the magical techniques, i.e. things like scrying, which are attested to in these grimoires and texts, as pretty much one of, if not the largest influence on the founder of Mormonism, Joseph Smith, in the early 19th century. I have an episode about it. Have a listen if you haven't already. There's also, of course, the idea of treasure hidden away in places like Iberia and its influence on the enormously influential books of St. Cyprian. The allure of treasure has seemingly never gone away. What has diminished is just the methods via which one goes looking for treasure, and particularly the use of magic to do so. We do see flashes, however, in other ways. One particular flash that I would love to draw people's attention to is something that was rather big for a period of time in the late 70s, particularly in England, and it was called psychic questing. Some of the older listenership to this show, people that very well might have lived through and remember the late 70s. If this is you, you very well might roll your eyes into the back of your head at the mere mention of psychic questing. To those listeners that wish to tut me on this, I think that psychic questing is a very fascinating period of Western magical and paranormal history. Yes, a lot of it was bullshit, but there were instances that were actually kind of weird and truly spooky. And I'm going to take a couple of minutes here to talk about the Green Stone. Pretty sure most of you have never heard of this. It's a fascinating one. It's one that I'm sure once you hear it is very much within the vein of magical treasure hunting. Before we dive in and I give, a very short synopsis of what went on with this Green Stone, what exactly is psychic questing? And one of the people involved in this story of the Green Stone, Andrew Collins, this is how he describes psychic questing. If found in the Oxford English Dictionary, psychic questing would be listed as using intuitively inspired thoughts and information for creative purposes, be it the exploration of history, the search for hidden artifacts, or simply the quest for enlightenment. It can begin with a strange dream, a visionary experience, or an overwhelming compulsion which prompts the person to embark on a sequence of discovery. This often involves uncovering confirmatory facts, visiting sites and places revealed only by intuition, and communicating with perceived external forces and influences through either meditational practices or magical processes. Often this takes the form of contact with a so-called genius loci, spirit of the place, or site guardian, which provides information in order that the quest might continue on to the next level. Seems to share a lot of similarities to what we have been talking about this entire episode, does it not? So what actually happened in this affair of the Green Stone? It's not called that. It's just normally called the Green Stone. There's a book written about it with the person I just mentioned, Andrew Collins, as well as Graham Phillips, two researchers that are at the center of this whole thing. And truthfully, I don't want to share too much information because the story itself is kind of wacky and spooky and kind of all over the place. There's parts of it that are, is that true? Is this untrue? What's actually happening here? For my money, though, it's a rollicking story, whether it's true or untrue, or if it's a combination of both. Refer to my earlier episode with Joshua Cutchin and Ren Collins about stories and spirits and things of that variety. Anyhow, what happens is that there's these two researchers, as I mentioned, Andrew and Graham. They learn about a green stone, and that perhaps this green stone might have some kind of crazy supernatural power in some way, shape, or form. Again, those of us that are familiar with Hermeticism, there's the idea of the emerald tablet. Could possibly be something like the Philosopher's Stone anyways. There's a series of clues and dreams and visions and intuitions, and what happens is some psychic questing that these two and another group, they start to go off into the countryside and start to use their psychic questing skills in their quest to find stuff, which they actually do. They find a sword that very well probably was used in 19th century Masonic rituals. They also find a green stone, not unlike the ones that they had intuited and that there were visions of. In fact, some of the visions said that they would find this stone in a kind of a box, and some people even drew the box from their visions. And then they went out and along the river Avon, they find a box, and it looks exactly the same. And inside that box is a small green stone. A lot of weird stuff starts to happen once they find these artifacts and once they become more and more involved. Things like shadowy figures appearing, objects moving around a magazine office that is covering the story of the Green Stone. Suffice it to say, stuff gets very weird. The story is something that is almost unbelievable. Many of you that if you want to read up a little bit more on this or do a little bit more research on the Greenstone would very likely come away saying that all of it is fake, none of it is real. I'm not so sure. It's something that I think is quite odd, but I do believe that the two main figures in this story, again, Graham and Andrew, truly believed in what they were doing. They truly believed that they were psychic questing. And I think they truly think that the things that happened to them as a consequence of their questing has some kind of objective validity to it. All in all, a very interesting story. It goes without saying, however, and I might as well talk about this now because a lot of you I know would probably say one of the major reasons that this kind of activity and the magic that surrounded this activity really flourished was also due to its propensity in growing and fostering fraud. That is always going to be something that is tied to magic, whether it be magic that is based in some way, shape, or form with prosperity and gaining something of value, be it monetary or otherwise. Of course, with ideas of expertise pertaining to procuring treasure, anybody can say that they know how to use magic to find treasure, and certainly they can probably convince others who have some kind of money that their skills warrant a payment of some kind, or perhaps just being given an object of value in order to find other objects of value. Again, I mentioned earlier in this episode, a lot of times people would take advantage of other people. Magical treasure hunting has always been one of those things that skeptics, people that say that magic is not true and does not exist, love to point at, merely due to the fact that there are so many recorded cases of these treasure hunting expeditions being 100% ineffective and most of the time entirely perpetrated by fraudsters. There is not really any kind of record of how many times magical treasure hunting was successful. And frankly, while we will have no kind of statistic or numbers, the ratio of expeditions of treasure hunting being undertaken by people with the use of magic to treasure actually found is something that we will never have. All we do know is that in the period of time in which magical treasure hunting was a real, lived phenomena, most likely not very much treasure was found. That is not to say that people didn't find treasure. It's just that most likely we are never going to know. What about now? Do I personally think that you can use magic to find treasure here and now, today? The answer to that is probably not. While we are still finding hordes of things that people have buried long, long ago on a near weekly basis, there are probably better ways of going around to find it. I also think, in a way, that the explanation that Johannes Dillinger gives as to why magical treasure hunting was such a huge thing in the early modern period, and also why, in a way, magical treasure hunting has never really gone away completely via such things as psychic questing, is that it negates a real aspect that I think should speak quite loudly to most individuals that find this thing fascinating. I think there's something about this that speaks quite deeply to us. And I don't just think the reason for this is the glimmering of gold. I really do think that there is something within us that speaks very loudly sometimes. of a searing need within not all of us, but a lot of us to engage in adventure, to strike out against the normal and the commonplace of day-to-day life in order to experience the unfamiliar and create exceptional experiences. And I know some of you might just be like, this is this is coming from a very privileged point of view here, Douglas. For those people that live an existence that is based almost entirely on fear and survival, they don't have this thing. And part of me wonders if that is exactly true. To put it bluntly, I think Johannes Dillinger negates something important about the entire endeavor of magical treasure hunting, which is that of the quest. Not just any quest, that of the magical quest. The quest wherein, as one engages in it, the reality and objectivity of what you are doing tips into the mythological. It tips into the mythical. It becomes magical. And how this compulsion, in a way, is something that most likely is a huge part of us. It is part of what has given shape to a lot of the Western ritual magic tradition. And if a lot of this seems very highfalutin to a lot of you, I would also like to say that I think it is something that is sadly missing from a lot of people's magic right now. I'm not saying that every one of you needs to go out and use their magic to try and find treasure or just something, but that most magic I see nowadays is usually confined to the private sphere, to what is safe and domestic, and that it merely remains there. Something happens to your magic and, as a consequence, to your life when one steps out of what is comfortable and what is normal for you, and your ritual, in a way, becomes a quest. I'm sure for some of you, this might very well be the secret spice that perhaps your current magical paradigm is missing. Undeniably, it is one of the major reasons that I find embodying the imaginal or the visionary or what one can glean from things like dreams and bringing it in some way, or at least aspects of those things in some way, into this lived, objective, waking world. To most, the idea of using elements or doing somewhat specific things that you have dreamed about is a path that leads to madness. Some would even question why one would do anything like try to experience something along the lines of something that you dream experienced. All I know and all I can say from my own personal experience is that it's never as crazy as it sounds. What usually happens when you do these sorts of things is that the outcomes and how you feel throughout the process of going on one of these embodying the imaginal adventures is more surreal than anything. But when all is said and done, whatever you have gone through, whatever you have done, is always an extraordinarily unique experience. And usually, you might trip over some enlightenment along the way. I don't know. I'm just going to speak personally here. Perhaps I read and listened to too much Joseph Campbell when I was younger. I always loved listening to him talk about King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table and them going in seeking of something like the Holy Grail. Now that's an adventure, right? That is the archetypal quest of Western culture. You see, over the last year, I've had a lot of time to be able to recall, recollect, and remember all the kinds of magic that I've gotten up to in my 42 years on this planet, particularly because I haven't been doing very much of it recently. But there is one thing that, as I scroll through my mental records of the interesting and crazy experiences that I've had doing ritual magic, there's one thing that seems to crop up in the experiences that I would regard being the most magical. And that is that they usually involve me getting out of my comfort zone and going somewhere. Most of my greatest magic has been accomplished, and the results from that magic has occurred because I have gone out and, in a way, gone on a quest. Our lives are filled with normalcy and routine and safety, and for good reason. We are now at a period in time in which we are safer and better cared for the most part, in a way that our ancestors would just not be able to comprehend. No doubt we will never have statistics of these things, but I know you feel this in your bones when you talk to those around you, or maybe you even feel this yourself, that in some sense, the world has lost a great deal of meaning, that everything that surrounds you is artifice and devoid of anything special. If you're like me, perhaps this was one of the major reasons why you came to the Temple of Magic. There's something I hear time and time again from people that are interested in my show. They come to me and they say they want to live in a magical world. And then a year and a half later, they say that to them, it doesn't seem like magic is real in any way, shape, or form. They set up an ancestor altar. They did their banishing rituals. They meditated almost every day. Where was the magic? They were waiting for it, waiting for the magic to appear. And it never did. You see, the magic is all around us. It always has been, and it always will be. And forgive me if such a sentiment is trite at this point, but magic, in a way, should never, ever be the destination. Magic is the quest. It is the journey. And to return us from where we began, it is in the anticipation of knowing that there will be magic, that there will be an adventure, that the joy, not unlike that of a small child on Halloween night that knows they are about to undertake something special. I know you have this capacity. I know you know just how magical this world can be, and that it is in the seeking always. We all have many quests ahead of us. You might as well make it magical, for untold riches await. Go. All right, maybe some of you thought that the last 10, 15 minutes might have been me pontificating a little bit. Let's correct our course once again. There's one final thought that I'd like to leave everyone with for this episode, and I don't know if it's true. This bit of information feels true to me. Let's talk about paths and trails and things of that variety, because I promise you this has something to do with the topic of this episode. You see, I know a lot of people, particularly in this day and age, are terrified of the idea of scorn and ridicule and being looked at as being a ridiculous, superstitious person that believes in something that we know doesn't exist. This magic has never existed, so why are you doing the things that you do? And I know that if you take your magic out of a domestic realm and do some questing outside of the confines of home, this is certainly a possibility that somebody might find out and they might judge you, certainly. You see, for a period of time, there were two places that were thought to be both very magical to those that truly believed in magic and also a great place for finding treasure. But that if you were to go to these places and you were to do magic or to try and find treasure or dig up treasure, that the societies at the time felt this to be a despicable act. It was contemptible, and you might as well be in league with dark forces. And both of these places I find very telling because they're paths, or they have something to do with journeying and travel and going from one place to the other. The first place, I think, should be obvious to everybody. That was the crossroads. That was where two paths intersect. It was a liminal space, but it was also viewed as being a space wherein many spirits were said to congregate, and also a place where sometimes there would be buried treasure. And the other place was at the foot of what we would call a wayward cross, or a cross that would be a marker on the side of a path. And a lot of times they were set up for pilgrims to try and get to where they needed to go. These wayward crosses were markers that in many cases provided direction. And for the most part, they would not be nailed to a tree. They would be stuck in the ground. They were usually made of stone. It was thought that by doing magic at this site, and sometimes and a lot of times, these wayward crosses would actually be at crossroads, which just makes it that much more magical. Yes, it was thought that at the foot of these wayward crosses on these paths, that many times there would be treasure there, and that many times also in and around these wayward crosses, they were a magical place. Both places, crossroads and wayward crosses, are indeed crosses. Both places very magical. Both places seen as being a place that if you head there, you are doing something ridiculous and even perhaps damnable. These places, the crossroads and the wayward cross, could very well be from where we here in our Western consciousness birthed a trope that is familiar to every single person hearing my voice right now, which is, of course, that X marks the spot. Who cares what others think? Let's keep digging. All right, everybody, that's it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. I had a ton of fun doing this episode. Also, thank you so much for your patience. I know basically the entire month of January, I didn't have anything out here. I got ill, and then I thought I got better, and then I got ill again, and that's just what happens. It really knocked me on my ass, and found it quite hard to do anything, truthfully. But I am glad that I was able to take the time with this episode and do it properly and do it well. And I really, truly hope that you all enjoy it. So if you think that I'm doing something pretty cool here with this podcast, What Magic Is This podcast, and you'd like to show your support in some ways, I have 4 great ways that you can show your support and help keep this as what I do for a living. Because yes, this is my job. So the first way is the absolute best way. You all know about it. I've mentioned it a couple of times on this episode, but I have a Patreon. That is patreon.com/whatmagicisthis, or head to whatmagicisthis.com and find any number of the support me on Patreon buttons there. There's lots of them because I need your support, but also because I want you to come to the Patreon. I do some pretty fun stuff there. And I'm basically doing about 1 episode a month there, between an hour and an hour and a half. I'm going to try and get those numbers up over the next little while here. We'll see how it goes. But the kind of stuff that's on there is really fun. It's really great. I do shows about specific entities like angels or saints or spirits and things of that variety. But also I talk about certain books that I think that you need to have. There's videos there that show you how certain things are done for magic. If you don't know how to do something, I sometimes show you how to do it. So things like incense or setting up an ancestral altar, how to make a magical circle even. For this episode, you want to know how to make a magical circle that you and your friends can go digging while the demon chirps you from the edge of the circle while you try and find out those buried riches. Well, I show you how to do a magic circle. Although it's on some cloth, so it's probably not the most functional. Anyhow, what I'm trying to say is that I show you how to do certain things. It is only $7 a month. I have one tier. $7 a month has been the rate for my Patreon since I started it. That price has not gone up. I just want people to come and enjoy the stuff that I have there. I want to see you there. I have a ton of free members. I've got about 1,400 free members. If you're on the fence as to wanting to join the Patreon, trust me, it is well worth it. It's basically like a whole show unto itself. So if you enjoy What Magic Is This, the regular podcast, the Patreon has tons. I've got over 100 episodes there already, just waiting for you once you decide to support me and continue keeping this as my job. Recently, the Patreon episodes, for the most part, have been in and around the episodes that I have been releasing. So I did an episode on past lives, and so I shared some past life experiences or a kind of guided meditation that led me into past life and something that could very well be a past life experience of mine. I'm not too sure, kind of on the fence about it. This last month, I actually shared a story of a treasure hunt that didn't go well at all. I know I teased this a little bit earlier on in this episode. I'd love to share just a quick little snippet with each and every one of you because it's a fantastic story, and I share a few stories on the Patreon, and this was one of the more interesting, one of the more fun ones. And what makes it fun? People died. It's story of treasure hunting, and things did not go well. And so some people died. And then after that, some more people died. Anyhow, it is a fantastic story. It's called One Frigid Night in Jena. If you enjoyed the two earlier stories that I told during this episode of treasure hunts, you're going to love this Patreon episode. Trust me, it's a great story. Here is a small segment which I aim to entice you. Here you go. It was common knowledge for pretty much everybody at the time that sacred days that were honored by the church and by the provinces, were the de facto best days to do magic. And there were none better than the 12 days between Christmas Eve and Epiphany. These nights were given the name the Sacred Nights, otherwise known as 12-tide. And again, this was, without a doubt, the most magical, the most sacred period on the calendar each and every year. And while some folks would certainly have been a bit more cautious to do such magic around this sacred period of time, Johann and Hans seemed unfazed. The time between this meeting between the three men and the date in which they were going to attempt to find the treasure was a hectic one. Many things had happened. Both treasure hunters had their tasks to do. For Johann, he needed to find out, with his scholarly skills, exactly who they were dealing with. This white figure that looked to the workmen on the vineyard like a lady. He needed to ascertain who exactly this spirit was. So he spent some time at the vineyard and later on told both George and Hans that he knew exactly who this spirit was and who they should contact when they are doing their evocatory ritual. It was Johann's know-how that identified the spirit and gave it the name Nathaniel. All right, short and sweet with that one. Trust me, it's a fantastic and a wonderful story and well worth you perhaps joining Patreon and seeing all of the other things that I get up to there. As I said, it's basically like a whole different show. And in my opinion, my best stuff is on the Patreon. I'm not just saying that. I truly believe that. I take my time. I have a great deal of fun, and I really give it my all on those Patreon episodes. Also, what is going to follow this episode is that the next thing that I'm doing there on the Patreon, I'm going to be talking about a couple of entities that are usually summoned to help with finding treasure. And I know I mentioned earlier Oberian in this one, but there's a couple that I'd like to talk about that I find very fascinating. Allow me to be a bit cheeky and a bit of a tease. I'm going to be talking about a waver, and I'm going to be talking about a giant. All right. All right, I know some of you probably know who I'm talking about. It's going to be a fantastic episode because I just have so much fun with this treasure hunting stuff. Anyhow, all I can say is Patreon, it's only $7 a month. It is well worth it. Please, if you can see your way to supporting me, I would greatly appreciate it. It is what keeps me doing this podcast. It's what keeps me alive, and it is hopefully enjoyed by you. So that is patreon.com/whatmagicisthis, or head to whatmagicisthis.com. Find the links there. If you do not feel like doing the whole monthly paying schema that Patreon has, I also have a PayPal. Go to my homepage, whatmagicisthis.com. There's a bunch of PayPal links there. Just click it. You can give me $5, $10, $20. Any amount helps. It all just goes to paying the fees that I accrue for having this podcast. It's not cheap anymore. I just got, it's every single year. It's like, oh, I guess I have to pay more on that now. Yes, I had a couple of things that now cost way more because everything's expensive, as you well know. Anyhow, I cannot complain. I'm in a very exalted position being able to have a podcast as I do, but it does take money. So if you want to donate through PayPal, it just goes straight back in keeping the coals in the furnace and making sure that this podcast is still alive and running and as good quality as it is. So that's another way of helping me out. A third way of helping me out is, oh my goodness, there was a lot of books mentioned during this episode, and a lot of books that I was like, you absolutely have to own this book. You have to buy this book. This is a great book. These books, they're just such books. They're the books. There's books. There's books. This book. Well, guess what? I have an online bookshop. That is right. I run it through the fantastic website, bookshop.org. Here's what happens. Say I mention a book on my episode, and you're like, man, I want to own that book. That Cunning Man's Handbook sounds awesome. I would like to buy that. But I also want to help out independent booksellers, and I also want to help out the guy that has this podcast by the name of Douglas Batchelor. How can I do this? Well, you head to bookshop.org/shop/whatmagicisthis, or head to whatmagicisthis.com and find the bookshop links there. And then you can do all of those things. If you want to buy this book, you just click it, you buy it, and it helps out independent booksellers. It helps out me, and it also helps you because you are getting an awesome book. It's a win for absolutely everybody. Pretty much almost every book that I've mentioned in this episode is going to be listed there on the web page that I have for this specific episode. So if you're like me and you love books and you want to support one of your favorite podcasters and you want to support independent booksellers because things ain't great for them these days, the best way of doing that is finding my online bookshop and grabbing yourself 1, 2, 3, maybe even 4 books. It's a great way of helping me out as well. And I also love seeing what people are ordering. I get to see what books, I don't see who's ordering it, but I get to see what books people are buying, and it's always so fun to see. So once again, if you want to grab a book that I've mentioned in this episode or any of my other episodes, bookshop.org/shop/whatmagicisthis, or head to whatmagicisthis.com and find my bookshop in the menu there. Grab yourself some books. It's a great help. All right. And the last way of supporting me is not the greatest way of supporting me, but it is an awesome way to get yourself some really cool merchandise. Head to whatmagicisthis.com, head to the menu there, click on merchandise. You can grab some shirts, you can grab mugs, you can grab tote bags, you can grab all sorts of things, stickers even. I love the stickers. Just somebody ordered some more stickers. They're They're amazing. It's about 15 designs. I know there's going to be a design there that speaks to you. You'd love to have it on, I don't know, your laptop or your skateboard, whatever people are putting. put it on a lamppost in your city. Who knows, right? Anyhow, I don't see a ton of money from these, but I also I love seeing people wearing t-shirts or drinking coffee from a What Magic Is This mug. So if you do grab any of my merchandise, please, please, please send me a picture. It makes my day. I'm not just saying that to make you try and buy anything. If you really want to make my day, send me a picture of you wearing your merchandise. I truly love it. It makes my week. I'm not just saying that. But as I say on every single episode, the best way of supporting me is also a great way of getting more What Magic Is This into your life, and that is through the Patreon. So patreon.com/whatmagicistthis. Keep this as my job. I want to keep sharing these awesome stories with you and my somewhat bombastic opinions about certain things. But more than that, it would be awesome because you're making a dream of mine, something that I've wanted to do my entire life, come true, which is to be able to share the things that I think are wonderful and magical. It truly has been something I've always wanted to do, and now I am doing that. And I just have to say, I can't do it without your support. So if you can see your way to supporting, it would be greatly appreciated. All right, everybody, holy smokes. This has been an absolute quest. It's been a wonderful, wonderful recording experience and editing experience. The research for this one was just absolute tops. I've had so much fun. Dare I say it? It was the whole month of January 2026 was a quest in and of itself, filled with peril and plague and obstacles and a very rambunctious toddler who is walking now. And oh my God, she's a sleep terrorist. She's just so active. She just wants to be awake always, every single day. Literally, me talking right now, I am recording this. She woke up at midnight last night and didn't go to sleep until 5 a.m, when she only slept like another 2 hours. So daddy's operating on fumes. Anyhow, to those that know, yes, parenting is indeed the quest to end all quests. I wouldn't trade it for all the gold in the earth, both naturally there and put there by someone else. All right. That's all I got for this one, everybody. But I mean it. Get out, do some questing, create a quest for yourself, and go on it. Make your own mythology. Create your own myth. Thanks so much for listening, everybody. Until next time, I want each and every one of you to stay healthy, to stay hopeful, and to stay luminous. All right. Take care, everyone. All the best. Ta for now.